Hello children, welcome to this crash course, and the chapter for today's discussion is electric charges, fields and potentials. This is one of the very important chapters for any competitive examination. You need to master this chapter, understand the concepts and be good in all the equations that are used and also learn the application skills. Let us go through the important concepts and later we'll take up numerical problems. The basic idea of electrostatics lies with the application of charges. Charge is an entity which is responsible for electrostatic attraction or electrostatic repulsion. There are a couple of important properties associated with electric charges. What are those? Number one, charges are available in two types, positive and negative charges. This nomenclature suggests us the opposite behavior of charges, and positive and negative has no bearing on the magnitude. This is just an arbitrarily chosen sign convention. And the idea of quantization of charges is one of the very important idea. Charge on an object is an integral multiple of some fundamental charge, that's the charge on an electron, which is 1.6 into 10 to the power of minus 19 coulomb in magnitude. N is an integer whose value can be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So n can take up an integral value. So quantization tells us that the total charge is an integral multiple of some fundamental charge. Charge conservation tells us that in an isolated system, the total charge is constant. With respect to time or with respect to space, the total charge remains constant. It can also mean that the charge can neither be created nor destroyed. It can also be interpreted in this form, but the first version is a preferred version as far as board examinations are concerned. But understand that total charge remains conserved in an isolated system in any process. And behavior wise, like charges repel and unlike charges attract. Like charges repel and unlike charges attract. So this is the basic idea regarding the behavior of charges. Like charges repel and unlike charges attract. My fault. Unlike charges attract. There are some other auxiliary behaviors also, like charge is always associated with mass, and a moving charge radiates, or rather an accelerating charge radiates, etc. So these are all some other types of, or say some other properties. Remember, the two basic properties are quantization and conservation. These are very important properties. And of course, charge is additive as well. Charges can be added, or we can take out some charges along with the algebraic sign. When we want to charge an object, that means charging an object, process of charging an object generally involves addition or removal of electrons. Generally, it is addition or removal of electrons in solid conductors. A couple of important types of processes. One is by friction, in which objects are rubbed against each other, and that results in electrons being lost from one conductor to another conductor, or one system to another system. Second is by conduction, an important type of process. there is a physical flow of charges from one conductor to another conductor until potentials equalize. And the third is induction, in which there is no physical contact, but because of the force exerted, charges get segregated in the induced body, and thus induction can take place. For example, if I bring an inducing rod nearby or near another conducting rod, negative charges get attracted on the side, positive charges get attracted on the other side, and induced charges appear here. We call them as induced charges. Now we can probably leak out these charges maybe by grounding or by bringing it in contact with another conductor, etc. And thus charged conductors can be possible, or they are possible. The magnitude of the induced charge is given by inducing charge, I'll call it as a Q naught, into 1 minus 1 by K. This is the value of the induced charge, magnitude of the induced charge. I say magnitude here, it doesn't refer to any directional properties, it just represents charge maybe having positive sign or negative sign here. And this is inducing charge. In the case, the dielectric constant of the medium, which ranges from 1 to infinity, 1 to infinity, 1 for perfect insulators and infinity for perfect conductors. So we can also write it like this: inducing charge is equal to minus, induced charge is equal to minus Q naught into 1 minus 1 by K. Induced charge is inducing charge with a negative sign into 1 minus 1 by K. The important property of the attraction or repulsion between the charges is understood in terms of what is known as Coulomb's law. Coulomb's law deals with force between point charges. According to Coulomb's law, the force of attraction or repulsion between 2 point charges, for example Q1 and Q2, separated by R, this force is directly proportional to the product of the charges, inversely proportional to the square of the distance between them, and of course acts along the line joining the charges. This equation can be written like this: F is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught into Q1 Q2 divided by R square. If I want to write it in the vector form, F is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by R square. Notice, if I talking about the force on the first charge by the second charge, then F12. This is given by R12 cap, where R12 cap is the unit vector along the direction shown, R12 cap. Or this equation can also be written in this form. This equation can be written also as F12 is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by vector R12 cube R12 vector. So we can write the equation maybe in this form, or maybe like this also: F12 is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by R12 square R12 cap. Any of these two representations is perfectly fine. Any of these representations is perfectly fine. All right. In a medium, this force is given by F is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught epsilon R Q1 Q2 divided by R square, where that epsilon R is again dielectric constant whose value ranges from 1 to infinity, 1 for a perfect conductor, 1 for a perfect insulator, and infinity for a perfect conductor, infinity for a perfect conductor. So we can also write it like this: force in the medium is force in air divided by epsilon r. Force in medium is force in air divided by epsilon r. And in all these examples, the value of epsilon naught, is 8.85 into 10 to the power of minus 12. This can be written as farad per meter. And this 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught has a value 9 into 10 to the power of 9 Newton meter square per coulomb square. So this is the value of 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught. So remember a very important thing here. If I consider a charge q1 and another charge q2 separated by distance r, the force exerted on one by 2 is F12 and that by the that on the other is F21. Remember, force on 1 by 2 is equal to force on 2 by 1 in magnitude and opposite in direction. So these forces actually form action reaction pair. They act on different bodies, their magnitudes are equal, their directions are opposite. Let us consider a couple of cases here. Q1, Q2, and let's assume that the separation between them is d. Now, if Q1 and Q2 are same, let's assume that Q1 is equal to Q2 and the medium is also same, then clearly force is directly proportional to 1 by d square. That means force is inversely proportional to square of the distance, or I can write F1 d1 square is equal to F2 d2 square. That means if I consider the first set as at a separation g1 and the second set at a separation g2, then the force relation between these two charges or these two cases is given by F1 d1 square is equal to F2 d2 square. Another case. Suppose we consider a set of charges q1 and q2, first in air at a separation say d and in medium. Q1 and Q2 at a separation say some d dash, and this is in medium and this is in air. And our intention is to have force in air is equal to force in medium. That means charges should experience the same force. Now this gives me 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 divided by d square is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 divided by d dash square, and of course I should write epsilon r, or I should write k. This gives me, what is that? D square or d dash square is equal to d square divided by epsilon r, or d dash is equal to d divided by square root of epsilon r. That means the charges which experience the same force in air and in medium are related by this separation. So separation between them is given like this. So in air and in medium they experience the same force here. Remember, if the force between the two charges is to become maximum, that means Q1 and Q2 are present, then for a given separation, then the charge on each, if I call this as Q and Q, then charges Q1 and Q2 are equal, and this is to be distributed in such a way that Q is equal to Q1 plus Q2 divided by 2, which means that I had a total charge Q and I wanted it to get distributed, so then Q is equal to Q1 plus Q2 divided by 2. Alternatively, if I have a charge Q and I want to get distributed into two parts, say Q dash each, such that the force between them becomes maximum, so then simply Q dash is equal to Q divided by 2. So Q divided by 2 is the charge on each one of them. Suppose we consider two charges Q1 and Q2 separated by a distance d. Let us consider a position x such that any charge kept over there experiences zero net force. That means this position is a null position or equilibrium position. Then that position x is given by d divided by square root of q1 divided by q2 plus or minus 1. So q2 divided by q1, my fault, because I am taking the distance x from this side. So this distance is x. So x is given by d divided by square root of q2 by q1 plus or minus 1. Here, one of the very important types of problems is of this form. You have two charges and the charges are at the ends of the strings and they are suspended from a support. Suppose this semi-vertical angle is theta. Then these two charges experience the following forces. One is electrostatic force of repulsion, the second is the tension, and of course its weight. Now these forces can be resolved into components. Now if we resolve these forces into components, then what do we get? The forces can be shown like this. We have, this is going to be t cos theta and this is going to be t sin theta. Thus, the forces can be balanced. What do we have? We have t sin theta is equal to F and t cos theta is equal to mg, right? So, t cos theta is equal to mg and we have, therefore, if we divide them one by the other, we have tan theta is equal to F divided by mg. So, the forces and the force and the angles are related by this equation. And if we square them and add, what do we get? We get t square is equal to f square plus mg whole square, or t is equal to square root of f square plus mg whole square. Thus, the tension in the string can be represented like this. Also remember, in this case, suppose the two strings and the entire system is taken in a gravity free space. Then the entire structure will be something like this. The angle between them is going to be 180 degree and the force between these two charges F is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 divided by 2L whole square, 2L whole square. And also notice that this happens to be the tension in the string as well. F and T will be equal to each other. If the entire system is immersed in a liquid, for example, this entire system is immersed in a liquid. Then what are all the forces? Again, mg is there, F is there, T is there. In addition to this, you also have upthrust. And if you simplify by writing the expression for upthrust, the equation that you end up is something like this. Tan theta is going to be force in the medium divided by mg into 1 minus d divided by d dash, where d is the density of the solid, and d dash is the density of the solid, and d is the density of the liquid. So this d is the density of the liquid, and d dash is the density of the solid. So tan theta is related to the densities through this particular equation. So these are all some important things associated with electrostatic force. Remember these ideas, they are quite useful, particularly from problem solving consideration. Electric field is another very important concept, quite useful for problem solving. Electric field is nothing but a vector space around a charge in which another charge experiences a force. It's a vector space in which another charge experiences a force. This electric field, has a magnitude as well as direction. To get the magnitude of the electric field at a point, we keep a test charge whose strength is very, very small compared to the source charge producing the field. And what do we measure? We measure the force it experiences. And then we define the electric field as force experienced by that charge divided by the test charge. In general, it is written like this: electric field is force divided by test charge strength by taking a very, very small test charge. So this is your definition of electric field. The direction of the electric field due to a positive charge is away from it, while that due to a negative charge is towards the charge itself. The direction of the electric field due to a positive charge is away from it, while that due to a negative charge is towards the negative charge. What does that mean? It means that if you take a positive charge at this point, the electric field is away from it. This is the direction of the electric field. The electric field at this point is away from it. The electric field at this point is away from it. Likewise, the electric field at this point is away from it. What if I consider a negative charge? For example, you got a negative charge minus q here. The electric field at this point is along this direction. The electric field at this point is along this direction. The electric field at this point is along this direction. Or if I consider another point here, the electric field is along this direction. So the electric field due to a negative charge is towards the charge, and that due to a positive charge is away from the charge. Remember, it's a vector quantity. The field due to a point charge, the electric field due to a point charge is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r square r cap, where r cap is the vector which is along the direction of the electric field, or it is probably towards the charge or away from the charge. Many times this equation is also written in this form: 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r cube vector r. Any representation is perfectly fine. If the position vector of the charge is r naught, for example, the charge is located here and I want to find the electric field at this point, and the position vector of this point is r, then the electric field at that point is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q into R minus R naught divided by vector R minus vector R naught cube. So this is a complete representation of the electric field due to a point charge. If I have multiple point charges, for example, here is a charge Q1 and here is another charge Q2 and here is another charge Q3, etc. And this is where I want to find the electric field due to all the charges. Then I consider the superposition principle, according to which the net electric field at point P is field due to 1 plus field due to 2 plus field due to 3, etc. added factorially. Remember, the same thing holds good even in the case of forces also. For example, let's just consider a square containing charges Q1, Q2, Q3 and Q4 at its corners, and assume that this is the point under consideration. Then the net force at this point, you notice, is due to first charge, is due to the third charge, assuming all the charges to be of same sign, and due to the fourth charge, etc. Then the net force at that point is given by the vector sum of all the forces, F1 vector plus F2 vector plus F3 vector, etc. So all the forces can be added like this. If I have, say, 2 point charges, let's assume that the 2 point charges are Q1 and Q2, and this is the point under consideration. The electric field due to this is E1 and the electric field due to this is E2. Assume that theta is the angle between them. Then the net electric field is of magnitude as given by root of E1 square plus E2 square plus 2 E1 E2 cos theta. That's the net electric field. And the resultant, how to find out the resultant? If I consider the resultant, let's assume that the resultant is along this direction. This is the direction of the resultant, and assume that it subtends an angle alpha. Then the resultant is given by tan alpha is equal to E2 sin theta divided by E1 plus E2 cos theta. The direction of the resultant is given by this simple concept. One of the very important applications is that of the null point. Let us consider a situation like this. There are charges Q1 and Q2. Two charges are Q1 and Q2. And let's assume that in the first case, Q1 and Q2 are of similar nature. And also assume that Q2 is less than Q1, is less than Q1. This is a weaker charge. Then there exists a point at which the net electric field is 0. The net electric field is 0. Now, this is a point which is internal to the charges. Suppose those charges are dissimilar. This is Q1 and this is Q2, and again Q2 is less than Q1. I can say this is minus Q2. Now the equilibrium position is here. It is outside. This is the equilibrium position. This is external. And remember, this equilibrium position is always closer to the weaker charge. So we can generalize it like this. Equilibrium position is always closer to the weaker charge and lies internally for a set of like charges and lies externally for a set of unlike charges. For a set of unlike charges. Remember, one of the very important concepts. This can be represented like this. You have charge Q1, you have charge Q2, and I assume that magnitude of Q1 is greater than magnitude of Q2, values here, and assume that the separation between them is R. And clearly null position or null point is closer to Q2. And if x is the distance of the null point from Q1, x is the distance of the null point from Q1, then x is given by R square root of Q1 divided by root of Q1 plus or minus root of Q2. And x is the distance as measured from the null position from the first charge, and this is plus for like charges and minus for unlike charges. Plus for like charges and minus for unlike charges. So remember the problems based on this simple concept. The couple of simple ideas here. Number one, suppose I consider a spherical conductor, then the electric field, this of course radius r, then the electric field at a point outside is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r square, where q is the charge on the spherical conductor. At a point on the surface, it is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by capital R square. At a point inside, the electric field is given by 0. The electric field inside the spherical conductor is 0. So a graphical representation of the electric field as a function of R can be shown like this. Electric field remains 0 from center up to the surface, and at the surface it has maximum value and it decreases like this at a point as you go outside. These are obtained from the first principles, okay? Remember that these are obtained from the first principles idea. If I consider a line of charge like this, an infinitely long line of charge, lambda is the linear charge density, then the electric field at a distance r is given by lambda by 2 pi epsilon naught r. And a graphical representation of E versus R is like this. As you can notice, it is 1 by R dependent. And if you consider a large plane sheet of charge whose surface charge density is sigma, then the electric field due to this sheet of charge at a distance r is given by sigma by 2 epsilon naught. Remember, it is a single sheet of charge and the field is given by this expression. If you consider a ring of charge, and the ring carries a charge q and the radius is a r and the point is at a distance x on the axis, then the field at a point on the axis is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q into x divided by r square plus x square to the power 3 by 2. And at the center, the electric field is 0. The field at the center is 0. The electric field at the center is 0, and clearly the electric field at a point on the axis goes on changing. That means if you plot a graph of electric field as a function of r, this is the nature of the graph. At the center the electric field is 0, and the field is clearly 0 at a point far away. So the field goes on changing according to this variation on the positive side, and on the negative side the electric field is opposite in direction and it again goes on changing in this form. So this is the variation of the electric field as a function of distance due to a ring of charge. Many a times it becomes difficult to calculate the electric field due to distributed charges or say continuous charges, etc. In such cases, what we have is a simple tool called as Gauss law. But to understand Gauss law, first we need the idea of electric flux. So what is electric flux? It is a measure of number of lines. I repeat, it is a measure of number of lines per unit area. It is not exactly number of lines per unit area. It is a measure of number of lines per unit area. Let us consider a very simple situation like this. Imagine you have an open area and the electric field lines are represented like this. Then flux is a measure of how many lines are crossing. For an open area like this, the electric flux is given by E dot A, where E is the electric field and A is the area vector, which is nothing but value of the area into n cap, that is the area vector normal to the plane surface under consideration. Suppose you consider a curved area. For example, let's assume that there is a curved area or maybe the electric field is non-uniform, etc. You can just visualize this case. There is a non-uniform electric field and the surface is of this arbitrary shape. Then what you do is you take a small patch here whose area vector is along this direction, and at that point the field is along this direction. You find out what is the flux through that small part by writing E dot dA, and then the net flux happens to be integral E dot dA. So this is basically EA cos theta here, and this is integral E dA cos theta. In both the cases, theta happens to be the angle between area vector and the field vector. Remember, area vector and field vector subtend an angle theta. For a closed surface, the flux is taken with positive sign if field lines come out, and is taken with negative sign if field lines are seen to be entering or say inward. While for open surfaces, there is no preferential direction for the flux. With this, Gauss law, a very simple law, can be stated like this. According to Gauss law, the net flux over a closed surface is equal to net charge enclosed by it divided by epsilon naught. Means if I consider say closed surface like this, and if a couple of charges q1, q2, say q3, q4, etc. with appropriate signs are present here, then what does it tell? It tells us that net flux is 1 by epsilon naught times q1 plus q2 minus q3, that's it. Any charge which is present outside need not be considered, should not be considered for net charge consideration. Remember here a couple of important things. Number one, for a closed surface, the net flux is because of charge inside, while the electric field that we calculate is because of all the charges. Because of all the charges. Remember it. A quite useful thing. To solve the problems based on Gauss law, what we do is we club the two expressions. Integral E dot dA is clubbed with Q net divided by epsilon naught. That means we take these two together and we write integral E dA cos theta, E dA cos theta is equal to Q net divided by epsilon naught. So these two equations are clubbed and we choose an appropriate Gaussian surface such that electric field can be taken outside this integral, and theta has the unique value everywhere such that calculations can be rendered easily. Some of the applications are here. Number one, we have already come across with three important equations. Number one, field due to a line of charge, field due to a sheet of charge, field due to a sphere of charge, conducting sphere are already known to us. Now let us take up another case. Field due to a spherical cloud of charge. You have a spherical cloud of charge whose radius is r, and it carries a charge distribution rho such that charge density is constant. It contains uniformly distributed charge density, rho is constant. If that is the case, then the electric field at any point is given by the following set of equations. Electric field at a point outside is given by a simple rule, 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r square at this point. What is that q? It is the total charge. I wrote it in terms of rho, but you can easily find out it by writing rho into 4 by 3 pi r cube. Electric field at a point on the surface is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r square, while the electric field at a point inside is given by rho r divided by 3 epsilon naught. Rho r divided by 3 epsilon naught. Remember, one of the very important consequences of using this idea is electric field at a point inside is rho r by 3 epsilon naught. So, if I consider a point at a distance r, then the electric field over there is given by rho r divided by 3 epsilon naught. That means, if we try to plot a graph of electric field versus distance, then the nature of the graph will be like this. Inside it is directly proportional to r. That means at the center the electric field must be 0. And it goes on increasing linearly until you reach the surface. And outside, this is 1 by r square dependent. So outside the graph is of this form. And it reaches its maximum value at the surface. Remember a very simple but quite useful concept, that is electric field as a function of r. You can generalize a couple of cases here. Suppose I have rho is equal to constant, then the electric field at a point inside is proportional to r. Suppose you have this case, this time assume that rho is proportional to r. That means the density is not constant, it goes on changing. It is directly proportional to r. Then the electric field at a point inside is directly proportional to r square. If you consider likewise, in this case, rho is proportional to r square, we notice the electric field is directly proportional to r cube. So it is actually controlled by rho. That's why if we consider the case of a spherical conductor, in the case of a conductor, rho inside is 0. That means I can say it is equal to r to the power of 0, right? It is proportional to that is 0 rather. There is no charge inside at all. Accordingly, E inside is proportional to 0 or it is equal to 0. There is no electric field inside at all. So remember these simple but useful concepts as far as problem solving is concerned. These are quite useful to handle the numerical problems. These equations can also be written like this. The electric field near a charged conductor of any shape can be written in a general way, sigma divided by epsilon naught, in any general way. The force per unit area on a charged conductor, generally known as electrostatic pressure, or sometimes it is also referred to as mechanical pressure, though it is not due to the mechanical origin. This is written sometimes as pressure, mechanical pressure. Just beware of this one. It is given by P, which is dF divided by dA, given by sigma square divided by 2 epsilon naught. Sigma square divided by 2 epsilon naught. Remember this concept, a concept which is quite useful for handling problems. Electrostatic potential. Electrostatic potential is a scalar quantity. This is the idea which is related to the idea of energy. Suppose I want to assemble a system, then I need to do work. The work done to assemble the system is stored in the form of electrostatic potential energy. So, electrostatic potential energy is nothing but work done in assembling the system. Work done in assembling the system. Suppose I consider a system of 2 point charges Q1 and Q2 separated by a distance r, then the electrostatic potential energy is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 Q2 divided by r. If I consider a system of 3 point charges Q1, Q2, Q3, then the electrostatic potential energy of this system is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught. I will take two charges at a time, Q1, Q2 by R12 plus Q2, Q3 divided by R23 plus Q3, Q1 divided by R31 or R13, etc. So the system stores certain amount of potential energy. The system stores certain amount of potential energy. Now, electrostatic potential is nothing but potential energy per unit charge at that point. Or this can also be written like this: potential is nothing but the work done per unit charge in bringing that charge to that point. It is the work done per unit charge from infinity to that point. So remember, when we say this charge, it generally refers to the test charge. That means here is the source charge and I want to find the potential at this point P. Then I am going to bring the test charge from infinity up to this point. I'll calculate how much work is done and then I will divide it by the test charge strength, and that gives me the potential at that point. Basically, this gives me potential difference, but potential energy for infinite separation is 0 and therefore the potential over there is 0. So we take the potential at point P as the absolute potential. It is absolute potential. Potential due to a point charge. Consider a point charge Q. Potential at a point P due to a point charge is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q divided by R. Remember, due to a positive charge, potential is positive. Due to a negative charge, the potential is negative. Remember, it is a scalar quantity. Potential is a scalar quantity, and a positive charge produces a positive potential, while a negative charge produces a negative potential. So this can be written in the following form. The same idea can be written as V is equal to, as I said, it is work done per unit test charge, or say potential energy per unit test charge. If I consider couple of point charges, for example Q1, Q2, Q3, etc. I'll call them as say Q1, Q2 and minus Q3, and we want to find out the potential at this point due to a couple of charges, then the net potential at that point is the sum of the potentials, that is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught Q1 by R1 plus Q2 by R2 minus Q3 divided by R3. So the sum of the potentials gives us the net potential at that particular position. There is a relation between the electric field and the electrostatic potential. This relation can be written like this. It is generally written in two forms. One is the differential form. The differential form of the electric field and potential is written as E is equal to minus dV divided by dr. Remember, potential is a scalar quantity. This is also written in its complete form like this. E is equal to, this is actually r cap. So we need to write it like this. Now, this is written as, if I consider its components, it is written as minus dV divided by dx I cap. So it is written as dou v by dou x to take care of its dependence on three different say variables x, y and z. So it is written as minus dou v by dou x I cap minus dou v by dou y j cap minus dou v divided by dou z k cap. So the electric field is written in its complete form like this, or minus del v, where del is the symbol for the partial differentiation. In the integral form, this relation is written as potential at a point is minus integral E dot dr from infinity to that point, which is written as R, or sometimes it is written as P. Suppose the field is uniform For example, you have a uniform field like this, and these are the 2 points, points 1 and 2, and assume that the separation between them is delta r and the potential difference is delta V. Remember, potential at 1 is greater than potential at 2. Potential decreases along the direction of the electric field. So we write the electric field and the potential difference relation simply by writing E is equal to delta V divided by delta R. Delta V by delta R gives us the relation between the electric field and the electric potential. So in the case of uniform electric field, the relation is given simply in this form. Potential due to a spherical conductor. Potential due to a spherical conductor. Imagine you have a spherical conductor carrying a charge q whose radius is r. I am simply writing the relations for potential at various points. Potential at a point outside is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r. R being the distance of the point from the center. Potential at a point on the surface is again 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r. Potential at a point inside, this is very important, is not zero. Potential at a point inside is same as potential at a point on the surface, which is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q divided by r. So potential is not zero inside a spherical conductor. If we plot a graph of V versus R, the nature of V versus R graph is like this. Observe, potential is constant inside. It is not zero. So potential remains constant inside. Starting from center up to the surface, it remains constant. While outside, it is 1 by R dependent. Thus, the graphical representation is something like this. This is the graphical representation of the potential due to a spherical conductor. Electric dipole. Electric dipole is an arrangement of two equal and opposite charges separated by a fixed separation or say some distance. We can show the representation like this. We have charge minus q and plus q. Assume that the separation between them is 2L. I am writing 2L because the center of the dipole is the general reference point. And it is treated as a short dipole if the point under consideration is far off. Point is far off. That means D is much greater than 2L. So we are going to consider a short dipole for all our discussions. For a short dipole, of course, minus q and plus q, 2L. A dipole is understood in terms of its dipole moment, a vector quantity which is given by q into 2L, and of course it is p cap, where p cap is taken from negative charge towards positive charge. Negative charge towards positive charge. If I consider such a dipole, here is minus q and here is plus q, and imagine we want to get the electric field at a point on the axis of a dipole. On the axis of a dipole. And this is 2L and R is the distance from the center. The electric field at a point on the axis of the dipole is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught 2pr divided by r square minus L square whole square. But for a short dipole, this expression simply becomes E is equal to 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught 2p divided by r cube. 2p divided by r cube. And notice that the electric field is along the direction of the dipole moment. So, the axial field at a point on the axial line or say axis, the electric field due to a short dipole is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught 2p divided by r cube. What if I consider an equatorial line? That means on the perpendicular bisector. On the equatorial line, the electric field is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught p divided by r cube, but this time with a negative sign because the electric field is opposite to the direction of the dipole moment. It's along this direction. What if I consider a general point? That means here is the dipole, minus q plus q, 2L is the separation and this is the midpoint, and this is the point under consideration subtending an angle theta. Then the electric field at that arbitrarily chosen point is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught p by r cube square root of 1 plus 3 cos square theta. 1 plus 3 cos square theta. And if I assume that the resultant electric field is along this direction, subtending an angle say alpha with this line, then tan alpha is given by half tan theta. This gives me the direction of the electric field as well. This gives me the direction of the electric field also. Potential due to a dipole. The electric potential due to a dipole. If I consider a dipole, minus q plus q, 2L is the separation, and again I am considering a general point theta, then the potential at point P is given by 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught P cos theta divided by r square. P cos theta divided by r square. So 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught P cos theta divided by r square is the potential due to a dipole at an arbitrarily chosen point. Now the question that arises is, what if this dipole is kept in an external electric field? Let us consider maybe uniform or non-uniform. Suppose I consider a uniform electric field represented like this, and a dipole is kept this way. Minus q is the charge here and plus q is the charge here. The forces are QE and QE respectively. So clearly net force on the dipole is 0. What if it is a non-uniform electric field? For example, due to a source charge, point charge. And I have kept a dipole like this. Assume that the dipole is kept like this. Minus q is here, plus q is here. Clearly this charge experiences force like this, and this charge experiences a force like this. And obviously the net force is not 0. Thus, in a uniform electric field, a dipole experiences 0 force, and in a non-uniform electric field, the dipole experiences non-zero force. If I consider a uniform electric field and a dipole minus q plus q, 2L is kept like this, subtending an angle theta, then the dipole experiences a rotational tendency given by its torque given by P cross E. Torque has a value Pe sin theta. The torque on the dipole is Pe sin theta. Thus, if I consider theta is equal to 0 or theta is equal to 180, the torque on the dipole is 0. That means this is an equilibrium position. But remember, theta is equal to 0 gives you stable equilibrium position. Theta is equal to 180 degree gives you unstable equilibrium position. Theta is equal to 90 degree gives you maximum torque, that is Pe. But remember, it is not a stable position, right? Because the the torque is maximum there. It corresponds to torque is equal to Pe. The maximum torque is exerted on the dipole at that position. Suppose you have kept a dipole in this orientation, and this is of course theta 1, you can call, and you want to reorient that to theta 2. So something like this. I'll show the diagram like this. It is at an angle theta 1 and you want it to go to theta 2 position, from initial position to final position. Then the work done to rotate that dipole is given by Pe minus Pe cos theta 2 minus cos theta 1, or I can write it like this, minus Pe cos theta 2 minus cos theta 1. So the work done to rotate a dipole is given by minus Pe into cos theta 2 minus cos theta 1. Suppose I consider a dipole in a uniform electric field. This is the dipole moment, and assume that theta is the angle subtended. Then the potential energy of that dipole is given by minus P dot E, or minus Pe cos theta. This is given by Pe cos theta. So the dipole stores an energy which is given by minus P dot E, or Pe cos theta. Remember, this is the basic idea as far as the dipole is concerned. The work done to rotate the dipole, which is actually stored in the form of energy of the dipole. So these are all some basic ideas regarding the dipole. Suppose I consider two important concepts, particularly for competitive examinations. You consider a spherical conductor carrying a total charge q whose radius is r. Now, because of the interactions between the charges, the system stores certain amount of potential energy. The energy is known as self-potential energy. This self-potential energy of a spherical conductor is given by kq square divided by 2r. Kq square divided by 2r. For example, imagine this situation. You have a charge q1, another point charge q2, and another spherical conductor like this, carrying a charge q3. R1, R2, R3, and of course its radius is r. Then if I ask you to find out the potential energy of the system, what are all the terms? 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q2 divided by r1, first energy, plus 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught q1 q3 divided by r3, plus Q2 Q3 divided by R2 plus the self potential energy plus self potential energy. What is that self potential energy? That self potential energy is given by this expression. So you need to take all the interactions into consideration. Suppose I take self potential energy of a spherical cloud of charge. You have a spherical cloud of charge of radius r, and assume that the total charge on this is q. Then the self potential energy of this system is 3 by 5 times, that is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught, 3 by 5 times q square divided by r. So going back to this is 3 by 5 times, or I can write 3 by 5 times kq square divided by r. So do you notice that the self potential energy of a spherical cloud of charge is more than that of a spherical conductor? We might notice that. Actually, this is one of the reasons we can use to explain the charge distribution only on the surface of the spherical conductor, not at a point inside. So these are some important concepts from this particular chapter. Go through these concepts, internalize the equations. Lots of concepts are involved here. You need to be familiar with all these concepts and the equations to solve the problems. The chapter for our discussion is capacitors. This is one of the very important chapters, which in fact is an easy chapter and quite useful for any competitive examination. Let's try to understand and revise the important concepts and get a good grip on equations that are used. So the question that arises is, what is a capacitor? Capacitance is the capacity to hold. A conductor can hold the charges and thereby energy. So an arrangement which can hold the charges and thereby energy is a capacitor. For any conductor, the potential is directly proportional to the charge on this. Or we can say the charge is directly proportional to potential. So a constant of proportionality is introduced here, which is in the form of C, and this C, which is the ratio of charge added to the change in the potential, is called as capacitance of a conductor or capacitance in general. So capacitance is the charge that you add divided by the rise in the potential or change in the potential of a conductor. Depending on the geometry of the given conductor, there are different types of capacitors. But before we understand them, let us first understand the capacitance of a spherical conductor. A conductor of radius r, assume, carries a charge q. Its capacitance is given by 4 pi epsilon naught r. What do you notice? Do you notice that this spherical conductor has a capacitance 4 pi epsilon naught r, and that capacitance is independent of the charge? Do you notice that? So the charge present on the conductor does not decide its capacitance. It does not decide its capacitance. Remember, one of the very, very important ideas is that the charge does not decide the capacitance. Capacitance is a geometrical property. It's a geometrical property. The important types of capacitors are like this. Number one, parallel plate capacitor, spherical capacitor, and cylindrical capacitor. Parallel plate capacitor, spherical capacitor, and cylindrical capacitor. These are the three important types of capacitors. depending on the geometry. Let us first take parallel plate capacitor. What is a parallel plate capacitor? It is an arrangement containing a set of plates, conducting plates carrying charges which are equal and opposite. This is connected to positive terminal of the battery and the other is connected to negative terminal of the battery. This supplies positive charge and this supplies negative charge. I am using the terminology supplies, observe, and thus the charge on this plate is plus Q, the charge on this plate is minus Q. This results in a uniform electric field from positive plate to negative plate. This is a parallel plate capacitor. And assume that the intervening medium is air and the separation between the plates is D and the area of each plate is A, then the capacitance of such an arrangement is given by epsilon naught A divided by D. D is the plate separation. And remember, D is much smaller than A. The plate size is very, very large. The plates are very large. Here, remember, A is the common area of overlap. For example, if you have a set of plates like this, they are parallel, but the overlap is not 100%, then it is only this overlap region which should be taken into consideration. This should be taken into consideration. So, parallel plate capacitor can be represented like this. Spherical capacitor. In the case of spherical capacitor, we have a set of conducting spheres, concentric conducting spheres. Their radii are A and B, and this is given a charge plus Q and this is given a charge minus Q. Or we can say that the outer conductor is connected to ground. So in the first case, we have outer conductor connected to ground and the inner is given a charge. Then the capacitance of such an arrangement is given by 4 pi epsilon naught AB divided by B minus C. 4 pi epsilon naught AB divided by B minus C is the capacitance of a spherical capacitor whose outer conductor is grounded and the inner conductor is given a charge. What if I consider another case? This time, this is given a charge while the inner conductor is going to be grounded. The capacitance of such an arrangement is given by 4 pi epsilon naught B square divided by B minus C. So capacitance of such an arrangement is given by 4 pi epsilon naught B square divided by B minus A. So remember, if the inner conductor is grounded versus outer conductor is grounded, the situations are different. It's not the same thing. So, this is the capacitance of a spherical conductor whose inner conductor is grounded. Third is cylindrical capacitor. Arrangement. We have a set of coaxial cylinders . This is of radius A, the outer is of radius B, L is the length of this cylinder. And assume that the outer conductor is grounded, then the capacitance of such an arrangement is given by 2 pi epsilon naught divided by 2 pi epsilon naught L divided by ln of B by A. Many times it is interpreted in terms of capacitance per unit length because we take a long conductor or say cross-sectional areas are small. So this is written as 2 pi epsilon naught divided by ln of B by A. So remember these expressions for the capacitance of conductors of different geometries. A very important point that should be kept in mind is something like this. Let us consider a pair of plates forming a parallel plate capacitor. Let's assume that this capacitor is given a zero charge. So you tend to think that the capacitance of this is also zero. No. The capacitance is still given by epsilon naught A divided by D. Remember, capacitance is a geometrical property. It depends only on the geometry. The presence or absence of the charge does not alter the capacitance. It's still the same. It is basically holding ability. It's holding ability. Electrostatic potential energy of a capacitor. The capacitor stores charge and thereby energy, and the energy stored is given by half CV square, which can also be written as Q square by 2C or half QV. Any of these expressions is perfectly fine. Remember, this energy is stored in the electric field between the plates. This is plus, this is minus. The electric field is present between the plates, and in this region the energy is stored. The energy density, which is energy per unit volume, is given by half epsilon naught E square. Half epsilon naught E square. Remember, the energy density is given by half epsilon naught E square, which can also be written as sigma square divided by 2 epsilon naught. If I consider the plates of a capacitor, a parallel plate capacitor, they are charged and they tend to attract each other. And this force between the plates is given by Q square divided by 2 epsilon naught A. This can also be written like this. This is half epsilon naught E square A, or the force per unit area, which is electrostatic pressure, sometimes also referred to as mechanical pressure, is given by sigma square divided by 2 epsilon naught. So we can write the expression for the energy stored, force, as Q square divided by 2 epsilon naught A. Remember, this is the force per unit area, which is actually electrostatic pressure, and it can be represented this way. Dielectric capacitors. If a medium is present between the plates of a capacitor, we call it as a dielectric capacitor. For example, let us consider this arrangement. There are two plates and the separation between those two plates is occupied by a medium. Let's represent it this way. There is a medium whose dielectric constant is K, or relative permittivity is K. Capacitance of such an arrangement is given by epsilon naught A into epsilon naught divided by D, or we can also write it like this: epsilon naught A divided by D. The dielectric constant K can also be used. I can write epsilon naught K A divided by D. Any of these expressions is perfectly fine. So you notice that the capacitance in the presence of a medium or dielectric capacitance is capacitance in air into K. So it increases K times upon the introduction of a material. Or the dielectric constant can also be written as capacitance with dielectric divided by capacitance without dielectric. Suppose the dielectric is filled partially. It is not filling the space between them completely. Let us see what to do. Let us assume that here is a set of plates. D is the separation between them and A is the plate area. And let's assume that a dielectric of thickness T is introduced. Dielectric of thickness T is introduced. Dielectric constant of that material being K. Then the capacitance of such an arrangement is given by epsilon naught A divided by D minus T plus T divided by K. D minus T plus T divided by K. Suppose multiple dielectric slabs are introduced. Let us look at this arrangement. We are introducing multiple dielectric slabs, something like this. Their dielectric constants are K1, K2, K3, etc. and their thicknesses are T1, T2 and T3, etc. Then the capacitance of such an arrangement is given by epsilon naught A divided by D minus T1 plus T2 plus T3, etc. minus T1 by K1 plus T2 by K2 plus T3 by K3, etc. Or this can also be written like this. Capacitance is epsilon naught A divided by D minus sigma T plus sigma T divided by K. So we can represent the capacitance in this particular form. Capacitance can be represented in the general form in this way. So remember these basic ideas. Suppose the dielectric slabs are occupying completely. For example, this is the arrangement. Assume that this is the arrangement. In the case of a parallel plate capacitor, this is T1, T2, T3, T4 and their dielectric constants are K1, K2, K3, K4, etc. Then for such an arrangement, you notice that capacitance becomes epsilon naught A divided by, this term vanishes and we have simply T1 by K1 plus T2 by K2 plus T3 by K3, etc. So if there is no air space, then the capacitance is simply given by this particular expression. This is the expression for capacitance in the case of a dielectric capacitor. Combination of capacitors. There are two primary types of combinations, series and parallel. In the case of series combination, capacitors are connected end to end such that the charge on each one of them is same. So we can call it as C1, C2, C3, etc. And the charges are all same here, plus Q minus Q, plus Q minus Q, plus Q minus Q, etc. on the inner plates, and V is the potential difference across the entire system. Across each one of them, we can call it as V1, V2, V3, etc. This is equivalent to a single capacitance. We can call it as equivalent capacitance. And equivalent capacitance is a single capacitor which stores the same charge as that by the arrangement across the same potential difference. Here a couple of important things that should be kept in mind are like this. Number one, V is equal to V1 plus V2 plus V3, etc. Second is, because the charges are same, we can write Q is equal to C1 V1 is equal to C2 V2 is equal to C3 V3, etc. Because the charges are all same. So C1 V1, C2 V2, C3 V3, which means that we can write C1 is to C2 is to C3 is equal to, what is it going to be? It is nothing but 1 by V1 is to 1 by V2 is to 1 by V3 and so on. Or V1 is to V2 is to V3, etc. is 1 by C1 is to 1 by C2 is to 1 by C3. So potentials divide in the inverse ratio of the capacitance. And the equivalent capacitance is given by the simple relation 1 by C1 plus 1 by C2 plus 1 by C3. Reciprocals add to give the reciprocals add to give the reciprocal of the equivalent capacitance. For example, you have two capacitors C1 and C2 connected in series. The equivalent capacitance is given by C1 C2 divided by C1 plus C2. If you have, say, two identical capacitors connected in series C and C, the equivalent capacitance is C divided by 2. If you have, say, n identical capacitors all connected in series, then equivalent capacitance is given by C divided by n. So remember these basic ideas as far as the arrangement of the capacitors in series combinations concerned. Parallel combination. Parallel combination. Capacitors are said to be connected in parallel if the arrangement is such that the potentials are same across all of them and the charges add to give the net charge. So we can show this way. V is the common potential and this is equivalent to a single capacitor. We can call it as C equivalent, V, etc. Now remember, corresponding to this, the charges add Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3 is same as the charge supplied by the battery or the charge on the equivalent capacitance. So charges add here. And V1, V2, V3 are all equal to each other, which means that what is it going to be? V is equal to Q by C, so Q1 by C1 is equal to Q2 by C2 is equal to Q3 by C3. Or we can write Q1 is to Q2 is to Q3 is equal to C1 is to C2 is to C3. Or charges divide in the ratio of the capacitance. And the equivalent capacitance is given by the sum of the capacitances. C1 plus C2 plus C3, etc. Let us consider two capacitors C1 and C2 connected in parallel. Then the equivalent capacitance is given by C1 plus C2. Let us consider two identical capacitors connected in parallel, C and C. Then the equivalent capacitance is 2C. Assume that there are n identical capacitors all connected in parallel. Then C equivalent is given by n times C. N times C. So the equivalent capacitance is the sum in the case of parallel combination, and in the case of series combination the reciprocals add to give the reciprocal. This can be used in the case of or to find the charge sharing of charges. Suppose we consider sharing of charge and of course energy. That means during the regrouping. Let us consider two capacitors C1 and C2 and their charged to potentials V1 and V2. Now let us assume that this is of course positively charged, this is negatively charged, positively charged, negatively charged. Now let us assume that they are connected such that the similarly charged plates are connected to each other. Then the common potential is given by C1 V1 plus C2 V2 divided by C1 plus C2. C1 V1 plus C2 V2 divided by C1 plus C2. And the loss in the energy during regrouping of the charges or resharing of the charges or charge flow is given by half C1 C2 divided by C1 plus C2 into V1 minus V2 whole square. So remember this important idea. The common potential is given by this expression and the loss in the energy is given by this expression. Suppose the capacitors are connected in such a way that the oppositely charged plates are connected. For example, this is what we have. This is positively charged, this is negatively charged, this is C1 V1, C2 V2, and this is negative, this is positive. And if I am going to establish a connection between them, then the common potential across this arrangement is given by C1 V1 difference C2 V2 divided by C1 plus C2. C1 V1 difference C2 V2 divided by C1 plus C2. Remember, this is one of the important ideas as far as the regrouping of the charges is concerned. One of the important types of problems which are asked quite frequently in competitive examination is based on the merging of drops. Merging of drops. Let us assume that there are n identical drops, each of radius r carrying a charge q. There are n such drops and they merge to form a bigger drop of radius r and the total charge is q. And let's assume that potential of each small drop is v. We can call it as Vs. And the potential of the bigger drop is Vb. Then a couple of important equations which are worth remembering are here. Number one, the total charge q is equal to n times q. The capacitance of the bigger drop is equal to n to the power of 1 by 3 times capacitance of the smaller drop. Cs is the capacitance of the smaller drop. The potential of the bigger drop is n to the power of 2 by 3 times potential of the smaller drop. The energy stored in the bigger drop, if I use the symbol UB, the potential energy of the bigger drop as against potential energy of the smaller drop is given by n to the power of 5 by 3 times potential of energy of the smaller drop. Surface charge density of the bigger drop is given by n to the power of 1 by 3 times surface charge density of the smaller drop. Remember this, a quite useful equation, set of equations. These are handy as far as problem solving is concerned. You may wish to remember all these equations. Another important type of problem generally asked in competitive examinations is something like this. the effect of dielectric. Let us consider an air capacitor whose capacitance is C or C naught, and let's assume that the potential difference across this is V naught and the charge is Q naught, and the electric field between the plates is E naught. And let us consider, this is of course air capacitor, and we are going to insert a dielectric slab. We are going to insert a dielectric slab with battery still connected. You know, if the battery is connected and some alterations are done, it means that potential difference is constant. So the final capacitance is C, final potential difference is V, final charge is Q, final electric field between the plates is E, with dielectric inserted, and of course the battery is still connected. I have not shown the battery in the figure, but remember, battery is connected here. Then the final capacitance is equal to K times initial capacitance. Final potential difference is same as initial potential difference because battery is connected. The final charge is K times initial charge, and the final energy is equal to K times initial energy, and of course these are U naught and U, and the final electric field is same as the initial electric field. The final electric field is same as the initial electric field between the plates. Suppose we consider this effect of dielectric with battery disconnected. Battery disconnected implies charge is constant. Same set of concepts here. Air capacitor, capacitance is C naught, potential difference is V naught, charge is Q naught, energy is U naught, and the electric field is E naught. And this becomes a dielectric capacitor C, V, Q, U, and E. These are the final parameters. How are they related? They are related by these equations. C is again Kc naught. Q is equal to Q naught as the charge remains the same. V is equal to V naught divided by K. E is equal to E naught divided by K. U is equal to U naught divided by K. So this is the set of relation. These are the important equations as far as the battery connected versus battery disconnected cases are concerned. Suppose we take one more important application in the present context. Let's assume that battery is disconnected versus battery is connected, and plate separation is increased in a parallel plate capacitor. Parallel plate capacitor. So what happens? Now capacitance decreases in the first case. Second case, capacitance decreases. Potential difference increases. Electric field remains constant. Charge remains constant, and energy stored in the capacitor increases. Second case, battery is connected, V remains constant. And what about E? So notice that E decreases and Q. So obviously battery is connected, and so if you look at it, Q is equal to CV, C has decreased and V has remained constant, so Q decreases and of course U decreases. So remember these concepts as far as battery connected versus battery disconnected cases are concerned in the case of a capacitor. In the case of a capacitor, this is how to work out the important types of problems which are quite frequently asked in competitive examination. Another type of problem which is quite commonly asked is the heat produced in switching in capacitive circuit. Heat produced. So when the switch is closed or opened, there is always the charge flow from one point to another point, and because of this flow of charge, heat is produced, and the heat produced can be obtained like this. The heat produced is equal to work done by battery minus energy absorbed by the capacitor. Energy absorbed by the capacitor. So remember, if the switch is closed, then heat produced is equal to work done by the battery and minus, of course, minus energy work done by the battery minus energy absorbed by the capacitor. Here you should remember that work done by battery to charge a capacitor is given by W is equal to CV square, which is equal to QV, or this can also be written as Q square divided by C. One of the important things to remember is that the work done is actually twice the energy stored in the capacitor. It is twice the energy stored in the capacitor. You already come across with that equation, half CV square. And now you notice that the work done is actually Q square by C, which corresponds to twice the energy stored in the capacitor. So these are some important concepts as far as capacitors are concerned. Familiarize yourselves with basic equations which are used here and learn the concepts. And in our next session, let us take problems based on the concepts that we have already learned.